Welcome to session 6 of my creation course. And just to look at what we saw in session 5, we saw that in day 4, God created the sun, moon, planets, stars, galaxies, and nebulae, filled the universe. Now, the sun gives us a way to determine a year, the moon gives us months, and stars help us navigate. In addition, of course, the sun gives us light and heat, and it's beneficial, it's required, I should say, for a plant to make food from photosynthesis. And we also saw that God made constellations, which are star patterns that don't change. They change in orientation, but not in shape. So now we go to day 5, and we'll also look at day 6 after today. But let me read you from Genesis chapter 1, 20 to 23. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters in the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth." And there was evening, there was morning, the 5th day. Now, some of the creatures that were created in day 5 supposedly evolved from land creatures. So right there again, we've got another contradiction that flies in the face of the Bible. And also evolutionists believe that fish developed longer fins, and eventually those fins turned into legs and they crawled out on land. Now, let me ask you this, just play the devil's advocate here. If that were true, okay, so there has to be a day when that happened. It didn't happen, it can't happen over long periods of time. So over long periods of time, as the evolutionists say, they developed their fins into legs and started to move. But that one day, they must have come out of the sea and started to walk on land. Now, what are the chances of them finding the same species that they are on this great shoreline that we now have, one gigantic continent? What are the chances that they meet up with the same kind of species as they are, that also walked out that same day onto land from the sea, and they were the opposite sex so that they can procreate? Now, it just doesn't happen. It's infinitesimally against all science. And so, anyway, now birds that were created on day 5, all the birds were created on day 5. They have the unique ability, at least most birds, to fly. And what gives them this ability to fly is their bones are hollow, but their frames are rigid like an airplane. They have powerful muscles to flap wings. And wings are designed for lift. They are curved, as you can see here. They're curved and the bottom is flat. So the air flows around the top faster than over the bottom, which creates lift. Now, that's something that God created in day 5, and it took us years to discover that principle. And also in birds now, they've got a different breathing system. We've got kind of a bellows system. The diaphragm, when you breathe out, the diaphragm pushes up. When you breathe in, the diaphragm pulls down, bringing the air in. But in birds now, the airflow is only in one direction, which increases the oxygen, which they need to power their wings. Now, feathers also control flight, and again, it took man a long time to figure that out. Feathers also keep the birds warm, and in owls, they actually silence the wings. And my wife and I were hiking fairly recently on a hiking trail nearby, and we saw an owl. And it wasn't that far away, but we did not hear it flap at all. It flew so silently. It's incredible. That's the way they catch their prey. We've mentioned kinds. You keep hearing that word in these last few verses of chapter 1. But we owe our taxonomy, which is the classification of all living things, to a Christian biologist named Carl Linnaeus. He, in 1758, came up with this classification system. So we start with a domain, we have kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, which the Bible calls kind, genus, and species. Now, there's very few in the domain. I mean, everything's in the domain, let's put it that way. But then it starts to branch off. So we have plant kingdom, animal kingdom, and then there's various phylums of each, and classes and orders and families. And as we get down to genuses and species, that's where we get the tremendous variety. Now, the variety is inbred into the genetics of any creature. So possibly at the time of creation, there was, let's say, 2 dogs, a male and a female. They had the genetic makeup to form all the things that are in the dog family now. So, for instance, the coyotes, wolves, dingoes, and all the other ones that are in the dog family. So they had the genetic makeup to come up with all of those. Now, so when God created, he didn't necessarily create all the genuses and all the species. Those have developed over time. This is what is known as a microevolution. Now, I use that word, evolution. However, evolutionists claim there's macroevolution. What is the difference? So microevolution is subtle changes within a species or within even a family, subtle changes, but it never changes from one family to another. Macroevolution, just like those fish developing legs, develop into different families, it just does not work. So that's macroevolution. That's what evolutionists rely on for their way of thinking, that things evolve from very simple things into very complex things. Now, the other thing that we have is echolocation. That is something that God created in bats and whales. And for instance, the fishing bat now, it can detect a fin of a fish as fine as a human hair, just 2 millimeters above the surface. It can distinguish sounds 2 to 3 millionths of a second apart, which is more sophisticated than our current radar technology. A toothed whale's echolocation starts with a series of low-frequency clicks called a train, produced by the animal. This train passes through the melon of the whale, which is a fat-filled organ in the head of the toothed whale that focuses the sound wave. The train of clicks is focused into a beam that bounces off objects and reflects echoes back to the whale. The echoed sound waves are received in the fat-filled cavities of the lower jawbone. These sounds are conducted through the bone to the ear and the brain, where the location of the object is interpreted. The whale can determine the distance to an object, its size, shape, the speed that the object is traveling, and its texture. Now, when we consider the echolocation system that is there, we must talk about irreducible complexity. Now, what do I mean by irreducible complexity? If we look, for instance, at this mouse trap, then it has a few parts. It's got the bar that goes over the spring part. It's got the part here where you put your bait. But if we look at it closely now, none of this will work if it had no base. And then this bar, if it wasn't held on by that little U-shaped clip, then it wouldn't work either. If this bait part didn't swing up and down, then it would be also useless. If this spring bar wasn't there, it would not work. If we didn't have the spring to make it all work together, it would not work. If we did not have these little clips to hold the spring bar in place, it would not work. So irreducible complexity means that all the parts must be there in order for the system to work. Remove any one of those parts and it's a useless system. So to think of now evolution saying that eyesight, for instance, developed over millions of years. Well, why develop it if it doesn't work in the first place? So all of these systems, in fact, not only echolocation, but our bodily systems that we have and things that the animals and birds and everything have, boils down to irreducible complexity. If any one of those parts is missing, it's useless. So it's definitely there by design. So before we look at day 6 and the things that were created then, here's a kind of an overview to give you an idea how busy God was on day 5. He created the corals, the anemones, sea pens, jellyfish, starfish, sea urchins, sand dollars, sea cucumbers, stone lilies, crabs, lobsters, crayfish, shrimp, krill, barnacles, snails, octopuses, squids, clams, scallops, oysters, and chitons, sponges, fish, whales, sharks, just to mention a few. Also on day 5, he created the birds. And we all know that there is a huge variety of birds. And some of the bird species that we have, or bird families, I should say, are the raptors and different orders there. Ducks, swans, geese, oilbirds, owlets, nightjars, nighthawks, frogmouths, potoos, and I do go much more in detail in my book on all of these creatures. Herons, egrets, storks, cuckoos, roadrunners, quails, malcohas, kuas, kukals, falcons, of course, turkeys, grouse, chickens, quail, ptarmigans, pheasants, loons, and of course all the songbirds that we have. And there's so many that it would just take too long to do any justice to them in a short time that we have here. All right, so now go on to day 6. God was equally busy on day 6 as he was in day 5. Let me read to you from Genesis chapter 1, 24 to 25. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. On day 6, God also created the reptiles, and dinosaurs are reptiles. The name dinosaur means terrible lizard. Originally, all seem to have been vegetarian at first. And the question is, like evolutionists will tell you that the dinosaurs went extinct about 70 million years ago when a big meteor crashed into Earth, causing mass extinctions. However, it would seem that dinosaurs existed with man. Even in biblical accounts, we see that there's a possibility of dinosaurs and man coexisting together. Let me read to you from Job 40, 15 to 24. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold his strength in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. Now, a lot of commentators will use describe this behemoth rather as a hippopotamus or an elephant. And have you ever seen the tails of an elephant or hippopotamus? You know that they do not look like a cedar, and the cedars of Lebanon is what's pictured here. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs like bars of iron. He is the first or the chief or the biggest of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword, for the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of reeds and in the marsh. For a shade the lotus trees cover him, the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? Now, also in Job, there's a different type of creature listed here. The behemoth seems to be more land-based, but lived in rivers and waters and swamps and whatnot. But this one is exclusive to water. Job 41 continues, can you draw Leviathan with a fish hook, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? Will he speak to you soft words? Will he make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you put him on a leash for your girls? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons, or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of a man is false. He is laid low even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? Who was first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his goodly frame. Who could strip off his outer garment? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined one to another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke, and from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. Now, right there is the basis for our fire-breathing dragons. And it seems that they actually existed at one time with man. In his neck abides strength, and terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him and immovable. His heart is as hard as a stone, hard as the lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. At the crashing, they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. On earth there is not his like. A creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. Now, dinosaurs were first, I should say the fossils of dinosaurs were first discovered in England in 1676. Before that, they seem to have been totally unknown. Yet, there are many stories, drawings, and carvings of dinosaurs that exist before that time. Now, in Cambodia, there's a temple that was built in the early 1100s called Angkor Wat. And on the temple, there's many stone carvings, and there's one that looks like a stegosaur. Now, remember, this is long before 1676 when the first recorded dinosaur fossil was found. So there's stories in the Congo of monsters. There's, of course, Loch Ness, and we have one here called Champ in Lake Champlain. There's Ogopogo in British Columbia. These all look like plesiosaurs. Now, I have my own theory. Humor me, if you will. I heard that the reptiles, at least many of them, will continue to grow until they die. So the oldest one of any species is the biggest one, or vice versa. The biggest one of any species is the oldest one. So before the flood now, man lived an incredible length of time, like up to 969 years for Methuselah. And right now, we only live about 90 years. So let's say, for argument's sake, we live 1/10 of what we used to live before the flood. So if the same conditions are true for the dinosaurs, which are reptiles continue to grow until they die, then they were 10 times bigger than they are now. So let's take a look at, for instance, iguana. Iguanas are roughly about 3 feet. Multiply that by 10, you get 30 feet. Crocodiles have been found to be 40 feet long. So we've also got little lizards, 6, 7, 8 inches long. What if they were 10 times bigger as well? You'd get 60 or 70 inches. And that's getting to be pretty big for a lizard. And you'd be calling them a terrible lizard. So my theory is this, that because we live shorter now, so do the reptiles, and because they don't live as long as they used to live, they are much smaller. So yes, some were hunted to extinction, some died out for other natural causes, maybe couldn't get their head around the new weather systems, things like that. But for the most part, I believe that the lizards and other reptiles we have are really descendants of the dinosaur. So yes, they did live with man and still do. Now, if we come to a conclusion here, the order of creation does not match the order of evolution. The two are always at war with each other. Birds, bats, dinosaurs, other animals display incredible design. And change within families is built in genetically. All the information for the different species in a family have always been there from day one in the genetics of the creature. Now, the Bible contains science. It's simply stated, it's not stated as a classic university level textbook or anything like that, but the science that is in the Bible is true. And that brings us to the end of this session. We have not looked at man yet. That we will keep for the next session. Thanks for watching again.